Good morning. You're very welcome to today's webinar, Innovate UK Funding Masterclass. Today is the second in our Invest in I series of webinars on Innovate UK funding and support for Northern Ireland businesses. My name is Lisa Braniff. I'm Invest in I's Innovation Funding Advisory Service Manager. And joining me on the call today is Dr. Stephen McComb, Knowledge Transfer Advisor in Innovate UK Business Connect. And Stephen will take us through the main presentation of our funding masterclass. And following the presentations, our Q&A session will be hosted by Barbara Orr. Barbara is the Ecosystem Senior Innovation and Growth Specialist for Innovate UK Business Growth. So as I said, today is the second in our series of webinars. So I'll start by just briefly recapping a few of the key messages from our first webinar, which was an introduction to the Innovate UK funding and supports. If you have missed that webinar or if you want to revisit it, the full webinar is recorded and is available on Invest in I's website, and you can access it through the QR code displayed on the screen. I'll also inform you about the Invest in I advisory supports that are available for businesses who want to apply to Innovate UK funding supports. And then Stephen will talk you through the grant writing masterclass, which applies for Innovate UK funding and is also applicable to other grant applications. And finally, we'll conclude today's webinar with a Q&A session. So throughout the webinar, you have the option of writing your answers in the writing your questions in the Q&A function. I will hope to answer as many of those as possible at the end, particularly those that will have wide applicability to all the attendees on the webinar. So in our first webinar, Dr. Vicky Kell, Invest in I's Director of Innovation, introduced the importance of innovation and Invest in I's innovation escalator. So innovation is critical to enhance productivity and to enable businesses to grow and succeed in export markets. We have a number of innovation supports in Invest in I, and they range from supports for companies who are starting their innovation journey to those companies all the way through to companies who have been innovators for a long time and have very sophisticated innovation and R&D functions within their businesses. For those companies starting out and innovating for the first time, there's innovation advice, we have small scale innovation vouchers, and we have support on the innovation process available through Innovate NI. For companies who have increased their capacity for innovation, there's technical development and supports and incentives in order to support your operational development. And for those companies who have progressed along their innovation journey and have started to undertake research and development for adoption of knowledge and for applying new knowledge in order to develop innovative products that are uniquely placed to succeed in the marketplace. In addition to the wide range of supports that Invest in I has on offer, there is also funding and support from other opportunities, and Invest in I works closely in partnership with Innovate UK to ensure that there is visibility and access of the Innovate UK supports for all businesses that it's applicable to in Northern Ireland. So we do this in a number of ways through co-funding partnerships, such as with the Knowledge Transfer Partnership, which is co-funded by Invest in I and Innovate UK. We also support awareness raising in webinars such as the one you're joining us on today, and ensure that we are always signposting businesses to the support mechanism that best suits their business need for a given development at a point in time. In our first webinar, Paul Malcolmson, the Regional Manager for Northern Ireland, introduced us to the funding and supports that are available through the Innovate UK system. In our webinar today, the focus will be on the application process for a grant application in order to secure funding. But the grants is just one component of the Innovate UK funding system, and to get that overview of all the other elements that are available, I'd invite you to revisit the first webinar in our series. Before commencing an application for grant funding, it's very important that you take the time to assess the eligibility and suitability of the competition for your business. So each funding opportunity will set out specific criteria around company size, competition scope, and particular funding rules and collaboration rules that may be required for that competition. Many competitions will specify what is the stage of development of the R&D that can be supported. Some competitions will focus on R&D that is quite early stage and far from market. Other competitions and supports can offer support for those later stage R&D projects which are moving towards the commercialization. Many of the offerings will require match funding from the business. This means, for example, the funding could be offered at a support rate of 50% or 70%. The business will have to show where the other funding will come for in order to deliver the project as a whole and to ensure that there's sufficient cash flow for the company throughout the project duration. As I say, many of the projects will require a partner in a collaborative approach, and it's very important when meeting partners that the right partnership is brought together to deliver the best solution and to add value to the project as a whole. Grant, as I say, is one mechanism, and it's the one we're focusing on this morning, but there are other supports available through loan or equity, and really it depends on what your business wants to do to understand which support would be the right approach for a given project or for a stage of development of the business. And always keeping in mind that any project that you're applying for, it really needs to align with where you want to go with your commercialization strategy, and that the timeframes line up in terms of the application process, the assessment process, and the delivery of the project. Many of the projects will have to demonstrate that the innovation and R&D being supported through the project will enhance current or new products in a way which is significantly advancing what is currently available in the market by you or any of your competitors. And I would say for the process, there's always important to consider what value added there will be beyond the funding, whether it's through the partnership that you can work with or allowing you to gain that credibility for future investment. Always consider the grant application as part of your overall business strategy rather than a standalone project. In Invest.NI, we can support you to navigate that funding system and assess those critical criteria for the calls. We do this through a number of avenues. Raising awareness of the opportunities is one element. I'd invite you to visit the Business Support Finder in NI Business Info, which has information on innovation supports from funders within Northern Ireland and also UK national funders such as Innovate UK. Innovate UK also has a dedicated innovation funding service portal where you will see all the competitions that are upcoming from Innovate UK. Within Invest.NI, our innovation funding advisory service can also help you to check if the project idea that you have is a good fit for a particular fund, whether that's for Invest.NI funding or for other funders such as Innovate UK or other agencies. We can give you advice on the application process and help you with partner searching if that's something that is needed for the competition and can add value to your business. When you hear from Stephen, he will highlight the value in having an independent set of eyes review your draft application. That's something which we can support you with at Invest.NI. And we'll also signpost you to other specialist advisors in Innovate UK Business Connect, Innovate UK Business Growth, or other agencies that we work with within the ecosystem to ensure we're offering a connected support service for businesses. For those businesses who can meet the criteria to become an Invest.NI customer, you may be able to also apply for our financial support for project defining and scoping through the project definition program. And so I'd invite you, if you are interested in that support service, that you can contact Invest.NI at innovationfundingadvice@investni.com. So I'm shortly going to hand over to Stephen McComb, who will deliver the main presentation on grant funding. Before that, we'd like to get an idea of a little bit of the experience from the attendees on the webinar today. So there's a poll that's appearing on your screen now, and we would ask you to let us know in terms of applications to Innovate UK funding. Have you had at least one successful application? Have you applied to Innovate UK but not yet been successful? Or are you considering making an application to Innovate UK for the first time? So if you'd like to respond to the poll, that will just give us an idea of the level of experience of the attendees on the call today, which will help in the delivery of the presentation. So the results of the poll are in, and we have 35% of the audience have had at least one successful application, which is fantastic. 15% have applied but have not yet been successful. And we can see that about half of the audience, 50%, are considering making an application. So that's perfect, because this webinar is really to target those companies who are considering an application for the first time, or those who want to improve their success rate of their applications. So I'm pleased to welcome now Stephen McComb, who will take you through the main funding masterclass. And I look forward to your questions at the end. So I'll hand over to you, Stephen. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Welcome everybody to the session. I'm very grateful there is 50% who are considering it an application but haven't tried that yet. So that's fantastic for us to understand. And well done to those who have been successful so far already. You should perhaps be taking a session. And those who have not been successful just yet, hopefully this will help you push over the line a little bit. As mentioned, my name is Steve McComb. I am a KTP advisor for Innovate UK Business Connect as my main role, but I also interact with a number of other parts of the wider health ecosystem, technology ecosystem, lots of different technologies, etc. So hopefully this presentation is sort of based on dealing with lots of companies who have been in your position of trying to apply for something and trying to work through the various hoops and hurdles to make sure you put a compelling case forward. The actual presentation itself has really been defined over quite a number of years. So it keeps sort of changing with the times and sort of what's been asked of yourself as an applicant. And you'll see sort of the language will change over years, the focus will change over years. But ultimately, at the end of it, it is a race or a competition which you need to be fantastic at. You need to sort of shine more than other people. Quite often people will sort of put an application in to fill in the word count, and it's the wrong approach, because really we have to be a very successful application. We therefore have to shine in that application. We are primarily looking at Innovate UK funding today, and as you say, I work for that organisation. However, the principles that you'll see are applicable to other organisations and other funds. So even if you're considering sort of other funds beyond Innovate UK, some of the principles we'll talk today are relevant to that, and consider as you go forward that this is going to be sort of something that will carry you into other places. The grant writing masterclass is broken down into 3 general areas. The first round, telling a good story. The second, about what does it feel like to be an assessor. And the last part really around the tips and summary. You'll see at the bottom I have this sort of assessor's prayer of send me a good one. And it is worthwhile just at this early stage just sort of thinking through that you're going to write an application, you're going to put your heart and soul into that. However, somebody on the other side of this receives a bunch of assessments, and they therefore have to work their way through and grade it in a manner that sort of says that this is successful, this is unsuccessful. So do be mindful that there's 2 parts to this process. Use the submitting sort of information, but there's also somebody considering, is this a good one? And that sort of human element in the back of your head as you're trying to present is useful, I think, for everybody. As you then start to go through this first session, really, our first section, we're really sort of asking you 2 parts. One is the element of an exam. So have you done all of the things which you have been asked? Have you filled in the right questions, etc.? And so that sort of concept is easy for us to get our head around the idea of an exam, as in we're completing, we're providing what has been asked of us. But the other part of that is the concept of a story. the person who's going to assess your application has not heard of you. They don't know about you. They don't know if you're good or you're bad. They don't know if your technology is really advanced or is very basic. So you really have to sort of get this idea of you need to convince the person. You need to bring a story as well as answer the question. And the bringing the two of these together is quite a good approach to try and consider, am I telling a story effectively? Can I tell it in a different way? Is there ways that I can bring it on a much stronger case so that somebody reading it will really be quite excited about it? So there are elements in this slide you see where we need to answer the question first of all. If they're asking you about the business case and you're answering about the technology, you're not answering the question. If you're telling them what you built, but actually the question is about the markets, it's the wrong approach. So really have that sort of piece of just what was the question I'm being asked. Start by reading it, start by rereading it, or reread it and then reread it and then reread it. So that idea of answering the questions. This next part then just about high scores on all questions. Quite often we see where an applicant is particularly excited about sort of telling me the business case around it, but whenever it comes to the project plan, it's very weak, or they've left out sections about the risk management. And immediately you're removing scores because they haven't answered what you've asked them, or they've done a very weak response in sections of it, but have been stronger in other sections. You need to be scoring high across all of it. So even if it's a bit that doesn't excite you, you need to be having that ability to respond with high scores. The story has to be convincing. I will read lots of technology responses. I will read lots of applications. Therefore, I need to be convinced that your story is better than the last one I read. I need a golden thread through it all so that it sort of starts with the use case, that then works its way through how you're going to change the world, and then delivers into the finances that's going to fund your company and help to grow. So that golden thread from the start right the way through, not disjointed. And particularly we see that where 2 or 3 people have written the same application. One person was responsible for section 1, one person was responsible for section 3, and they don't line up, or the language they use is completely confusing. Consistency through it all, cohesive, it joins together, and avoiding red flags, which we'll talk about in a second. But that concept of not doing things which put your score downwards. So Lisa mentioned this a second ago, alignment to the competition scope. You might be very excited at the fact that this is a £100,000 fund, and you think, oh, well, my company could do with 100,000. But is this the right competition for you? Or if it's not the right competition, should you be looking at other options? So start with that position of, is this the right thing for me? If you find that you're trying to squeeze yourself into the scope, it's probably one that you want to step away from and not waste your time. And there is an element of wasting your time if you fill in an application which is not relevant to that competition. You're not going to get scored highly, and therefore you should have been considering something else to develop your business. So consider that sort of, do I as a business line up with what they're asking me? Each competition will be slightly different. Some will be about newer companies, some will be about different types of technology, some are about healthcare or AI or something else. Make sure you're in the right competition. Moving then beyond that, sort of first impressions, again, the story concept. I may have read 5 or 6 applications before I get to yours. I may have another bundle to go beyond that. So that sort of sense of actually, how do I get what is being presented very quickly? And quite often, if I'm feeding back to companies who are making an application, there's usually a very simple response, just of, I don't get it. It's not clear to me what you're offering. It's not clear to me what the detail is. So that sort of sense of the short summary, just I get what you're offering. It tells the story quickly. I can then look for the rest of the detail beyond that. There's some tips in there about the style of the presentation. If it's very long sentences, it's difficult to maintain your sort of focus right through it. So maybe shorter, sharper sentences. Active tense are also part of that. Sell the project, be clear, concise, and think of that sort of concept of an elevator pitch. If you have somebody for a very short period of time, you need to convince them what is the 30 words or 50 words that's going to be the something that's going to convince that person before they leave the elevator. So bringing all of that sort of style and storytelling element together is quite useful. So moving on then, a need or a challenge. Again, sort of, if I sort of talk about sort of companies that I've dealt with who perhaps don't get this bit, is they perhaps start with technology. So they convince me that, or try to convince me that their new piece of software or new piece of engineering kit is something which is really worth investing in. I've sort of missed the step before that. Why do you need this technology? What's wrong with the business today? What's wrong with the health service? What's wrong with banking or similar that you're applying into? So start backwards, and you'll quite often see a question around this concept of a need or a challenge. So what is it you're trying to solve in the world? Why does the world need your technology or your solution? Bring the evidence behind that, bring facts and figures, bring detail of how this will be impacted, explain to them what other companies are in that area, why your product or solution will be different than what's already there, why will it be a step change beyond that, and define the unmet need. This is quite often missed by most companies as sort of oh yeah, we'll tell you about the story of our product. Well, we need to step back slightly and actually define why do we need your product, what's the underlying case behind that. Moving on then to your idea. So how does your idea address that previous question about the problem? So we're not just trying to push the technology in for the sake of it, or a solution in there that doesn't really need to be there. We're actually going to say something is going to change as a result of my technology. How big a change is it going to be? How many people will it be impacted by this change? How long will that last? How does it fit within the market? Those are sort of all important about how your solution is going to fit into the future. Is it going to be a slight improvement? Is it going to be incremental? And then do you have the freedom to operate within that? So in other words, have you just taken someone else's technology and you're going to apply it? Or do you have the ability to sort of influence how this is going to evolve and develop? Is the market ready? Very interesting sort of space. Sometimes a product can be too early. And you find sort of something which is really futuristic needs to have a number of steps before it gets there. So considering that, so how will the market adopt it and how will you get it beyond your idea through to something deliverable? The team and resources and delivery, this is it's one that's repeated across most sort of competitions, but who is going to deliver this? What is the gathering of people that will actually bring your technology or your solution to market? A few companies get a bit obsessed about things around sort of ownership of companies. That's not what the question is about. It's really going to be this sort of question about who's going to deliver your project. So if you're buying in some time from external consultants, or you have advisors in there, or wider sort of rules, and that together builds up a good team, that's a much more compelling answer than actually it's me and my brother doing this. You need to think about who's the teams. What about the resources that you need? What about the skills that you don't have? What are the things that sort of are beyond sort of your current scattering of people that are going to be important to get it to market, to commercialize it, to bring a plan beyond tomorrow? So think about that differently than just who is the owners of your business. Think about the wider sort of delivery element of it. Thinking about the market awareness side of it, again, how will you make money from the idea? Where's the opportunity? What are the trends around this? You see the questions on the slide, but this is really just about questioning of we're going to invest a large amount of money from government into your idea. The expectation is you're going to be able to commercialize that, and you're going to make much more money than we were able to invest into it. So how are you aware of the size of the market, the scale of the market? Where will your product take us in the future? What's your method of getting there? Who are you going to sell to? So whenever you come in with very generic questions, for example, we will sell into the NHS, that tells me you don't understand your market, because which part of the NHS, who's the buyer, what does the buyer need? If you're sort of giving very generic answers around sort of, yeah, then they will come and buy it, that sort of tells me you don't understand your market. If you come in and say, well, actually, we've built up relationships with these 3 people, they're telling us that they will buy at this level, at this cost, or here's the distribution pathway, or here's the framework that we'll sell into, that gives me a sense as an assessor to say you understand the market, you understand the path and the awareness of how to get there, and you understand the likely sort of challenges around cost points or price points. So just that sense of market awareness is really quite important. Moving then on to outcomes, route to market, etc. Again, linked into the previous one, you understand the market and you've now got sort of a number of ways to get there. So the 2 of them tied together, one's more on the scale and the other one's in sort of what's your next steps, or how, if you build this product over the next 6 months, what happens in month 7, what happens in month 10, how are you going to get it to fully fledged delivery. It will vary depending on the competitions, how they ask these couple of questions, but there's usually something about the market scale and then the delivery and method of getting there. The right kind of risk. A lot of people don't like to talk about risk because they always say, oh yeah, we've got this sorted and we know everything that's going to happen. That doesn't happen in any project. There is always going to be an element of risk. What the assessment is looking for is not an absence of risk, but is that you've controlled and managed and understood the risk. So if you understand sort of actually there's going to be 3 points which might mean that we're not going to make it to market, we want to understand those risks, but we also want to understand what's the mitigation that you're going to put behind that. So if your technology might not work, but then there's a technology 2 or different version, or there's a different approach, that's the way you write it up, is that this is perhaps not going to work. However, we've got another option behind that. So that sort of sense of, we understand the key risks, we've got mitigation options in there, we're ahead of the game to sort of understand both the impact on that, what mitigations are there, and how we're going to control it. So a well-written plan will have that sort of detail of just a reasonable risk. You look into the assessor to say, that's reasonable, you understand your market, you understand your product. So you'll also see sort of various questions, and these come through in different types and natures. There will generally be questions about costs. My recommendation to yourself is just to sort of be sensible about those, in that you're not trying to throw the largest cost at everything. You're trying to say, well, if this is my money, I will look at 2 or 3 options. I will consider which one's going to give me the best return for that small amount of money, and therefore choose option 3 as opposed to option 2. So you're trying to look at the cost, is it reasonable, and then put a little bit of justification to say, I've considered options. You then sort of looking behind that to say, well, is there other ways of doing it that would perhaps be more value for money, etc. So that sort of sense of, this is public money, I've made a reasonable case to consider what's the options, and I've got some consideration as to, will this give me a reasonable return to myself. Those are sort of some of the general sort of principles around costs. You also see questions sometimes around additionality. So would you do this project without this funding? Well, if you would do the project without the funding, why do we need government funding involved? So really you're trying to argue an additionality questions to say, well, the reason that we think this money is going to be important for us is we think we can get the market faster. We can think we can get a bigger market as a result of this funding. We think that there's options of beyond our current sort of capabilities that this will accelerate our route to market. So value for money comes into the first part around sort of, is this a good investment? So you see a number of different things there. Some of them are about justifying the cost, some about additional sort of contribution from the government and the funding innovation, and then you'll see occasionally questions coming through around sort of net zero, public value, etc. So this may also create jobs, it may also reduce carbon emissions, it may create some sort of reduction in public services or improvement of public services. So what else can you build a story around beyond just delivering an innovative product? So that was section 1. You're going to apply for a grant. Have you applied in the right way? Have you answered the questions effectively? Have you told a story which is compelling, which puts you to the top of the rankings? So let's think about this slightly differently. So I'm looking at it from the view of the assessor. So there are people like myself across the UK who will get this in some form of a batch. They will be asked to put a score against it, and that score will determine whether you're funded or not. It's as simple as that. They will rank you against other people. So let's think about that. I've used a quote in the bottom left around walking in somebody else's shoes. So I want you to walk for a few moments in the shoes of an assessor, because if you can understand that, then you're going to write slightly differently. So I'm trying to look at the negative side of it as an assessor. The red flags, the things that will frustrate an assessor, things that irritate assessors is quite a good way to sort of consider sort of the negative side of it. So the out of scope, so they're not eligible, we've talked about earlier on, but why would you put an application in if you're out of scope? It's just wasting your time, it's wasting the assessor's time, it will get thrown out quite quickly. Something a little bit sort of less black and white is going to be this overly technical language, difficult language, lots of acronyms thrown all over the place. You might understand your acronyms, the assessor might not. The assessor may confuse acronyms. So it's difficult language, it's complicated language, it's technical language which doesn't tell the story. Be very, very cautious. If you have some very technical things, describe it in layman's language and then perhaps put in brackets or similar the actual technical description of it. Some way convey something which is very technical to somebody who may or may not understand everything. Depending on the competition, they will have different levels of technical insight about the area. So just aim for that sort of middle ground where someone who is reading it may not understand all of the technicalities. You may need to put some bridge words in there to give them some sort of understanding of the area you're talking about. Poorly articulated offers, again, where the language is all over the place, it's not well structured, it's not telling the story clearly, it makes it difficult for the assessor. Unclear level of innovation. If I'm reading this and I'm thinking I've seen 10 of those, especially in areas like AI and sustainability, probably 70–80% of our applications at the minute say that they are AI or that they are going to solve sustainability challenges. So how does this separate from everything else that I have read? Why is this special? Why do I think that this is scoring higher in the levels of innovation than anybody else that I've read today? Lacks commercial focus, so fantastic technically, product-wise, however, it's not going to actually sell. I don't see how you're going to sell that to anybody else. Conflicting statements and lack of cohesion, we've seen in other parts of the presentation, but just that sense of it frustrates me, it conflicts with things, I don't get it. And then lastly, just this has probably appeared more in the last year or two, obviously, clearly ChatGPT written. This starts to appear in most of the assessor sort of windows, is that if this looks and feels like it's been written by ChatGPT, I'm sort of looking for, well, where's your fingerprints around it? Why is this special, and why is this yours as opposed to written by ChatGPT and is clearly not your background? So we understand that there are tools in the background which will help you to write a better application, remove grammar issues, etc., which we've talked about. But you need to put it in a context as this needs to feel like your application. It doesn't need to feel like ChatGPT's application. So be cautious in using some of those tools because it needs to still feel like yours, and your DNA is right the way through the application. Moving on then to top tips to delight an assessor. Do sort of keep in that mind is that myself as an assessor, and I know many of my colleagues, we love to get a good application. We look forward to something which excites them or interests them and actually tells something that they didn't know about in an exciting way. That is something we will delight in. So highlight where the project fits with the cause, make it easy for us to see that. Make it easy to read on the first pass, read through it, I get it. That's a beautiful thing that, for an assessor. Use other people to read the application as a critical friend. Lisa mentioned this earlier on. So is that with InvestNI? Is that with colleagues? Is that with your auntie Flo who's done these things? So use people who are not part of writing the assessment, or sorry, the application, because they will not have had the mind that you have of how to write this thing. So therefore they will be an external view person saying, well, what about this? Why have you not included this? I don't understand that piece. Ground every statement in evidence. So if you've said this is going to make 70% improvement, why is it 70% improvement? Where's the detail behind that, which is going to convince us? Sell the project early on, use impact statements to nail it. And what we mean by that is this is going to we're going to sell this sort of as a project which is going to change the world of this type of area. And we think it's going to make this level of impact on the day-to-day working with the people who use that. So that sort of sense of here's the product and actually the impact on the people who will use it is quite important. Within the assessor's side, you will always have some sort of a scoring matrix. In pretty much every competition, they will give you some insight as to what that scoring matrix looks like. And what I have done is I went through quite a number of scoring matrices and drawn out some of the sort of keywords that come through. So there'll be a much longer sort of statement about what is the need and how it should be defined, etc. But I just drew out a number of the words which were within that to give you a sense of what a high score looks like and what an okay score looks like. Now, if you know that the success application is very, very small percentage of the total, you need to be up in the scoring 9s and 10s. You need to be aiming there from the first word is put on your application form. If you're aiming for the okay, and you know that the success rate is going to be maybe 80%, or sorry, 20% or 30% or 10%, you need to be thinking, well, actually, it's probably not worthwhile me writing this unless I can get up to that top level of score. So let's look at the words that are across the scoring 8, 9s, and 10s. Is the need compelling and motivational? Is it a significant innovation? Does it look realistic? You can clearly see how it's going to be exploited. They understand the market drivers, carefully consider the risks, and the impact is significant or compelling. If your application is okay, you're not going to win this competition. You're not going to get funded. So somehow you've got to get yourself up to somebody reads this and says that's a compelling application, a significant impact. And my application has been based around that everything in every text piece in this is going to be in that 9s and 10s in the scoring. Otherwise, what's the point of making your application? So therefore, you need to start with the position of I need to be able to convince at that level of 9s and 10s right the way through the application. Put a comment in the bottom left there about an assessor's view. An assessor will take a longer time to review a bad application. And the reason we say that is that whenever everything is presented clearly and concisely, it just flows right the way through from start to finish. If an assessor is looking at something that is not flowing well, it's disjointed, they're having to look for the detail, etc., it generally takes them a longer time because they're trying to justify how it doesn't fully meet the various scoring requirements. So just consider that as you make your application. You need to be aiming for that great side of things in the 9s and 10s. You need to be convincing right the way through, and it needs to flow. So other part I mentioned about sort of around the standing out from the crowd. I mentioned about AI and sustainability being a high sort of dominant trend at the moment in many applications. And what again, I'm just sort of pushing out to make sure you draw out why you're standing out from the crowd. Be creative, solve the problems very compellingly, and give the assessor this sort of sense that actually they're reading something that they think in 5 years' time will be a significant business and significant growth, and they'll be excited they have had a small part in assessing that on the way through. So that sort of concept of we're not the same as everybody else. The assessor is excited that he or she has read that and been part of that small journey. So summary, and moving towards the end, I think there's questions afterwards, but summary of some things just to draw out a little bit further. Do you fit with the scope? Have you agreed sort of key points with partners? Are you clear, concise? Is there a clearer way you can write it? Can you rephrase those things? Can you take out a few words that take away from the story? Have you been consistent and had a golden thread right the way through the application? Have you convinced? Have you considered reasonable risks and for the level of innovation that you're putting forward? Can you quantify and justify any statements that have been put in there? Have you considered everything like an assessor? Have you refined it until it reads well and then re-refine it and then remove anything that's not adding to the story? And then sort of the last point around allowing enough time. And what we mean by that is this is never an 11th hour application. Generally, it won't work. So have that sort of thought of there will be a number of phases of application build and refinement, and therefore leaving it to the last minute just won't work. Again, a small point, very basic diagram around sort of the numbers of applications on the days and hours before the actual final date. And you'll see I've got a midnight the day before where the applications start to ramp up, and then there's the last couple of hours where everybody's trying to throw in their application just before the deadline at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, whatever is published. I've also put this little heart which is broken just after that. And what I mean by that is that quite often as assessors and people involved in the system, we get phone calls saying, oh, my computer crashed 3 minutes before the application, I can't get into the system, something else has happened, we've lost such and such, is there anything we can do? And generally the answer is no. So just keep that in mind, do not allow anything to stand in the way of you putting your application in if you put all that effort into it. So move it back 3 hours, 4 hours the day before. Why take the risk of leaving to the last minute and then something goes down? It will lead to heartbreak, and I can't do anything about it, and my colleagues can't do anything about it. They are reasonably fixed and hard deadlines, regardless whose fault it is. or if you have a very sad story about how you couldn't submit it because of X, it doesn't really matter. Keep that sort of sense of actually there's a hard deadline. I don't need to wait till the 11:59 or 10:59 for the application. I could put it in the day before. Build that into your thinking. Then beyond this, I've sort of went through a number of different things. There are good application guides available. You can scan through them, sort of get other tips and hints, etc. They will hopefully complement what I've said, but they may draw out a few points differently, and I do recommend those. And I'm coming to the close of my points. I think I hand back to Barbara, who's going to lead some questions.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was really informative, and hopefully everyone got something out of that for looking at how they can submit an Innovate UK grant application and these other applications that we have. We have some questions that have come through. I just wanted to start off with, Stephen, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see in grant applications that come your way?
I think the one that I keep repeating probably is that I don't get it. So just that sense of they haven't communicated sort of what their story of their business, so it may be better in their head if they think they know what they have. They might even convince themselves that it's really compelling, but whenever I look at the application, I just don't get it. So that would be sort of one of my most common ones, and then probably slightly beyond that was just sort of then the evidence case behind it. So if I do get it, but actually reinforcing sort of there's facts and figures there to sort of build that case, probably my two.
Okay, we have another question here. We are currently part of a new Innovators Innovate UK grant concluding in March next year, focused on developing our product foundation technology. Would I be eligible to apply for the upcoming Launchpad grant fund project starting in May to fund a pilot study specifically for validating this project?
I think sort of for today, sort of what we're trying to keep it reasonably generic in terms of sort of this is a general application. Anything very specific about that, you will see sort of on the grant application form, there will be an email linked into Innovation IFS system, and this is if you have further queries. So if you think there's a question mark around eligibility, I do recommend you send them a note. My sort of response from companies who have done that is that they are quite quick to respond, they're very clear, and it's been a very positive feedback. So rather than me sort of confusing the applicant sort of as to whether they fit or don't fit, my gut feeling is probably send a quick email, and they will get a quick response to say, yeah, that should be reasonable, or there's an issue in there.
There's actually a Q&A session tomorrow at 1 o'clock. So to the person who asked the question, if they want to register for that, it's on at 1 o'clock tomorrow. We can put a link in the chat to that event if they want to register for that. And there's clinics that will be running on Friday in Belfast and in Derry. So if you want to speak to a member of the team directly, you can as well at that. Just another question is, can I get my application reviewed before I submit, and how do I do that?
So Invest and I, along with colleagues in Innovate UK Business Growth, can offer a application review service. So we can do this in the best way if you're able to share a draft application well ahead of the deadline. So in order, what we will do when we look at your application is assess the answers you've given against the criteria for the competition in the same way that an assessor will be doing after you have submitted. And in that way, we can highlight areas where maybe you need to strengthen your response, areas where maybe the story isn't clear or you haven't evidenced what the claims that you've made in relation to the technology or the market. So we can, I suppose, highlight those areas where there's potentially weaknesses in the application to give you an opportunity to then strengthen it before you submit to the competition. As Stephen has highlighted, when you submit to the competition, that is final and it must be done by the deadline. But in the application review process, it's a more iterative process where you can share a draft, get feedback, try to strengthen it, and have if there's time permitting, you can get some, I suppose, final words of advice before you submit to the competition, at which point no further amendments can be made for an Innovate UK funding competition in particular.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to check to see if we've got some more questions here. Just give me a wee second. Another question that I've been asked is, I believe that you cannot submit the same idea more than twice. Could you elaborate, please?
I'm sort of cautious to fully elaborate. I think that is the rules around that. I would say from my experiences, so there's a little bit of space there for adjusting your ideas as well. So if an idea was rejected and clearly doesn't meet a market need, etc., so then you need to sort of suppose questions: is it the same idea going in, or should I have gone and developed a further idea? Should I look at other markets? Should I sort of step back to this drawing board and sort of consider, is this the right approach to things? So I think probably the rules are around the submission twice, etc. However, I would also sort of question, why would you be submitting the same idea twice if it was failed the first time? You obviously not understood something along the way, or you need to really go back to the drawing board of considering should a new idea be brought forward. So I think there's rules, and then there's also taking feedback from a competition.
Okay, and then another question is, do I need to have worked with a partner if I'm collaborating with them on an application before I apply?
I'll give a sort of a general sort of, obviously I don't know the details of that one, but what I would say is that from a risk point of view, from an assessor looking at something where there's been an existing partnership beforehand and they've built up relationships, etc., you get a sort of sense as an assessor, well, actually, this is a relationship that's going to lead to something bigger and better. So I would say probably the best case would be that you have worked with that collaborator, that partner, you've built up trust with each other, you know your strengths and weaknesses. That's quite a compelling story. If you haven't done that, then sort of that would bring a little bit of extra sort of question marks in the back of the assessor's head. So again, how are you going to mitigate that risk of sort of the relationship breaking down? So I would say find ways to work together, find ways to minimize sort of that risk side of it and make it look like this is going to be a really successful partnership. I think that sort of sense of building with friends and connections, etc., in a compelling way is quite a nice way to write an application.
Okay, that's great. I'm not seeing any other questions coming through here at the moment, so I'd like to thank you so much to Stephen McComb and to Lisa Brana for hosting this event this morning. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Barbara.